So yeah, as you might imagine, the large majority of this movie isn't much good at all. And again, it is worth noting that I have a grand old time with this movie, but it's not the same way I like the first two. With this one, there's a bit more ironic enjoyment involved because this movie genuinely sucks. Until it suddenly doesn't.
What a picture. What a picture.
Good picture.
And this is the major piece of this movie that is unreasonably bizarre to me. The fact that half of it is so terrible and half of it is actually pretty damn good. And it's not even as easy as the first half is bad and the second half is good, which was my memory of the movie before I watched it again for this video. No, the two halves of this movie are reasonably well distributed throughout this movie. It's not unheard of for this movie to cut from the coolest Superman shit you've ever seen to the dumbest shit you've ever seen. But for the moment, we're finished making fun of the movie for all the things it gets wrong. Now, I want to look at the stuff that it gets shockingly right, partly because I really love a lot of it, and partly because I think it's helpful to underline just how good the good stuff in this movie is, so you can get an idea of the whiplash you get when it jumps from the good stuff to the bad. And there's no better place to start than with the production value of this movie. See, here's the thing about Superman 3. It's actually directed pretty well. Now, hold on. The jokes in this movie are, of course, all terrible. But as I said, a significant number of these faults aren't in the directing, they're more to do with the screenplay of this movie. The actual approach to making the movie is, for the most part, really solid. For a start, while I don't think Lester fully understands the character of Superman, he does know how to make Superman action look pretty cool. Because unlike most of everything else, he takes it pretty seriously. There are several sequences across the movie that are actually pretty exciting. Take, for example, this scene at the chemical factory. This scene is completely stupid sight gag free, allowing for some classic Superman saves and some occasionally super cool shots, like this one of Superman walking through a fire to save Jimmy. In fact, of all of the Superman movies I've seen, this scene is one of my favorite pieces of Superman action. This also applies to the scrapyard fight. I think for this scene, it would have been extremely easy for Lester to turn it into a joke, but he doesn't. It's played completely seriously, only now looking a little goofy because of some mildly aged effects work. The result is that it actually becomes pretty intense. Speaking of effects, the visual effects work in this movie is, for the most part, extremely good. Lester had access to all the resources that were available to himself and Donna for the first two movies, and he applies them with just as much cleverness as the original two display. The back projected flight scenes look better than ever, especially this scene of Superman flying through the Grand Canyon or whatever on his way to take Webster down. The mix of practical work also stays on par with the first two, and on one occasion or two even improves on it. Superman's running takeoffs look better than ever in this movie, and they're integrated so well with the back projection that the illusion is very rarely broken. For all his faults with his comic sense of timing, Lester sure can direct a movie. Now, not everything is perfect in this respect. Some of the miniatures can look a little dodgy, and the video game section is going to be very hit or miss for some people. I personally find it kind of cute. There's also some arbitrarily bad back projection in one scene where Webster and company are flying down the side of the Grand Canyon. The makeup for Robot Vera might also strike people as being a little lame, because it is. But all in all, if you watch the more action-oriented scenes of this movie alone, you wouldn't be able to tell visually that this movie kind of sucks. We have to wait for Superman 4 for that. I think if Lester had been given a better screenplay, this movie might have actually turned out to be pretty good, or at least no more stupid than Superman 2 got in places. And even in this absolute mess of a screenplay, there is still a lot of kernels of ideas that I really like. The first one I want to talk about is the use of Lana Lang and Smallville, because quite a bit of it is actually rather lovely. I think what really makes this side story work is that it's actually quite simple. Two people who used to know each other in high school are given a chance to reconnect, to get back into each other's lives, and in the process they become much closer and are even able to help each other out in their own ways. It's really sweet and lends the movie some well-needed character outside of its general insanity. The first thing I like about the story is Lana herself. Now, a lot of this comes down to Annette O'Toole's performance because she brings Lana to life so beautifully, giving her a wonderful charm that's hard not to like. But it isn't just that. Now, given how Webster and company were pretty much reskins of the Luthor trio, give or take a personality trait or two, I think it would have been all too easy to just turn Lana into Lois 2.0. But in a rare moment of actually putting some effort into the script, the Newmans didn't do that. Instead, Lana provides a completely new dynamic for Clark to explore, just having someone he can talk to. With Jor-El, he has all these expectations of being the last son of Krypton. With Lois, it's an extremely complicated minefield of love going in all directions, especially with how Superman 2 ended. But Clark and Lana's relationship is simple. They're old friends who love each other in a platonic sense, mostly anyway, and they feel comfortable to share with one another. It's actually a scene where they do this that stands out as one of the best moments in the movie, where Clark and Lana are cleaning up after the school reunion. The whole scene just has this calm, comfortable feeling around it as they discuss their lives, with all their highs and lows. I also really like the direction that the story takes. Unlike most of the rest of the movie, which rushes from scene to scene at a dizzying speed, the scenes involving Clark, Lana, and her son Ricky, I was originally just gonna call him Who Cares the whole time like I did in the plot rundown, but I couldn't be bothered to keep up the joke, play out at a quieter pace. The result is that the evolution of the relationships they all share actually feels quite natural. You can see why Ricky begins to look up to Clark as a friend, for example. It's really sweet stuff. But most of all, these scenes are about Lana finally getting the life she wants. Throughout the movie, it's shown that she sacrificed a lot to stay in Smallville because it's always been the safer option. But as the movie goes, she's motivated by Clark and decides to take the risk to move Ricky to Metropolis in search of a better, happier life, eventually landing a pretty damn good job as Perry White's personal secretary at the Daily Planet. A simple thread? Yes. But it's what makes it work. It sticks to its premise without deviating into stupid, unfunny bullshit, well, mostly anyway.
Oh, Clark, that's Buster's dog food.
And as a result, it's one of the few things that actually feels genuine in this movie. There's even a really nice symbol of the whole thing in the diamond ring Clark gives to her at the end. See, in the beginning, she tells Clark she had to sell her diamond ring to keep the lights on, pretty solid image to grab hold of in terms of her sacrifices. But when Clark gives her the new ring that he made himself, not only is it a really cute moment, but it's also kind of symbolic. Lana doesn't have to keep making the sacrifices she did in Smallville. She can truly live the life she's always wanted now. Yeah, I'm reading into a plot thread that's like half elaborated on in the movie. Leave me alone, this movie's got little to no actual substance, so I need something to grasp hold of. In a similar vein, I will now overthink everything to do with the characterization of Clark in this movie, because for all the beats this movie has, the writing for our favorite Kryptonian is, shockingly, super consistent. Yeah, I know. Now, to be completely honest, there are one or two bad beats in the writing for Clark. For example, there's a bit gag where he's on the bus to Smallville, showing him being visibly bored and not interested in Jimmy's life story. This strikes me as just something Clark wouldn't do. Even if he was bored, he would never treat his friend Jimmy like that. It's just a bit of bad characterization for a shitty joke, and it's annoying. But beyond that, this movie does everything else astonishingly well. It's pretty well established by general fans by now that Superman is more of a performance than Clark Kent. Sure, Clark plays up the clumsy thing, but the confidence that Superman carries is always a bit more of a charade. The shyness that Clark has is a lot more real. And I think this movie plays with that idea really well. In all the scenes that Clark and Lana share, there's absolutely no hint that Clark is putting on a performance with her. As I said, they feel pretty comfortable with one another. It also shows in that Clark is a lot more assertive in this movie than he was in the past too. Take the bowling scene, for example, where Clark stops Brad from humiliating Ricky in front of all the other kids. There's still that trademark Clark Kent politeness, but there's that edge to it. His statement, "I think he's just doing fine on his own," sounding on paper to be polite, but revealing itself through Reeves' performances to mean something else entirely. Fuck off. Leave the boy alone. I think in this scene we get Clark distilled into one sentence. He's always going to try to be kind and polite, but there's still an edge to that if he's dealing with a bully. It's not as dramatic as him bad-mouthing Rocky and then beating him up in Superman 2, but I find it just as effective. And when he's in the Superman costume, that effective character work continues to carry over. There's the small stuff, like him giving a kid on the street a photo of him accidentally taken by a photo booth, or him showing up to bail Ricky out of a lie for his birthday party. All of this, of course, is perfectly in character for the last son of Krypton, but I think the moment that best shows that someone somewhere in the production of this movie understood Superman as a character is how he handles Gus Gorman. At first, he's annoyed by Gus's attempts to distance himself from Webster and company.
See, I'm not with them, Superman. Could have fooled me, mister.
But it becomes clear to him that Gus is just way in over his head. How this becomes clear to him isn't exactly clear itself, but that can be neatly filed away under shit this movie contrives to get from point A to point B. The point is, once he realizes this, he doesn't want to see Gus punished. Rather, he wants to see him given a second chance to do something good with the sheer amount of talent and genius that Gus has. This, more than anything that I've seen in a DC movie since maybe the ending of Shazam, is a perfect encapsulation of who Superman is. He'll always stand for truth, justice, and a better tomorrow, but he'll always make sure that the people who deserve a second chance get one, even if they messed up really badly the first time. But where the really interesting stuff in terms of how Superman is written is in the way he's written once he falls under the influence of what I will refer to here on in as the red kryptonite. Yes, I know it's green in the movie, but it behaves like Smallville's red kryptonite, so that's what I'm calling it. Before I had ever seen this movie, all I had on it was my dad's opinion, that it was terrible, but the evil Superman stuff was good. Well, so far I've named things about this movie that I really like, a lot of it is still pretty surface level stuff. But the Red Kryptonite storyline succeeds in not just being fun or cute, but actually being really interesting. I'll explain. For a start, we need to praise Chris Reeves' performance in this movie as both sides of Superman because it is incredible. Of course, he continues to excel at both Clark and Superman, but his portrayal of Dark Superman actually succeeds in being really haunting. There's the more subtle stuff, like the creeping sense of danger he puts in his performances in the early stages of the Kryptonite infection. But then there's the more iconic image, the darkened costume and the angry, bitter look. But there's something Reeves does in these scenes that makes Superman look physically different. Just as Reeves' talents made Clark and Superman look like completely different people, there is that much of a difference between Superman and Dark Superman. He almost doesn't resemble Superman in this form. There are a couple of factors at play here. The 5 o'clock shadow is definitely helping, and Reeves is noticeably slouching as Dark Superman, making him look a lot less strong and friendly and a lot more dangerous. This is even further underlined by the fight in the scrapyard. Two versions of Reeves' character are shown on screen together, Dark Superman and Clark Kent, and his performances of both are so incredibly distinct that they almost seem like they're completely different people. Nobody will be Superman like he was. Also want to note the scream he does as Superman starts fighting to break out of the Kryptonite spell because it's just gut-wrenching. But of course, a performance alone cannot carry the concept. There has to be some decent writing involved in the concept too, and rather surprisingly there is. In fact, the distance by which the writing of this plotline is better than the rest of this movie is somewhat mind-boggling. For example, the introduction of the concept of the Red Kryptonite is perfectly done because if you go into the movie blind, it works as an excellent bait and switch. We saw earlier Superman handle a piece of kryptonite with no response, so when he takes a funny turn here, you might think that he's getting sick like he did in the first movie, that it just took longer for the kryptonite to take effect. But then the news of the truck hanging off the bridge arrives, which leads to the most effective line in the whole film.
I'm sorry. I hate to make you rush off.
Well, there's no rush.
Instantly, you know that something is very, very wrong, because this is wildly out of character for Superman. And the direction of the scene is also pretty exceptional. Lester holds on this wide shot of Superman and Lana sitting on the couch slightly longer than is comfortable, which puts a bit of distance between us and Superman, telling the viewer that something is very wrong indeed. And when we return to close-up shots, his face is completely blank. Paired with the writing of him forgetting about the bridge entirely, it becomes positively bone-chilling. I also find it really interesting that Superman has one final moment of clarity before truly slipping under the spell of the kryptonite. It makes for a sad moment when he realizes he's wasting time at Lana's place, and it becomes all the more sad once there appears to be nothing left of him. I also like that the way he's corrupted doesn't completely fall out of the sky. I mean, sure, he's being a comical jackass and doing silly Newman script shit like straightening the Leaning Tower of Pisa or blowing out the Olympic torch. But the genesis of all this is laid bare in that beginning scene.
Well, there's no rush.
But the bridge.
Oh, it's okay. I always get there on time. Come on, let's relax a little.
At heart of Superman's behavior in this movie is arrogance, pure and simple. And the thing is, we know that this is something Superman is susceptible to. In Superman 2, it is clearly a sense of arrogance that gets him into this fight with Rocky, an arrogance that is quickly humbled when he has the ever-loving shit beaten out of him. So that being where it all starts is actually accidentally some brilliant writing. I say accidentally because I have a hard time believing that the Newmans made this connection on purpose due to the contents of the rest of the script, but then again, who knows? This sense of arrogance is also interesting because it provides a really good through line for Dark Superman's collapse. To begin with, it's just the voice that says, "You'll get there on time, try to get some with your high school crush." But then it grows in strength, telling him, you can do anything you want. This leads him to play havoc across the world, of course, but it establishes it means he stops saving people. He now considers himself far too above that. But what's interesting is that at some point the arrogance breaks, or is at least joined by something else, a sense of self-loathing. This is something I'll attribute a bit more to Reeve, because I imagine on paper the Superman gets drunk thing was meant to be little more than, see, he's a delinquent now and delinquents drink a bunch, so like, yeah. But Reeves' performance seems to hint that it's more than that. The look on Superman's face in the pub isn't one of superiority, it's one of bitterness. He's not an arrogant god anymore, he's a lonely, depressed drunk who also happens to have the powers of a god. By the way, both his self-loathing and the established arrogance come into play in the scrapyard, but I'll get there in a second. First, I want to quickly mention the moment that seems to trigger Superman's recovery, that being Ricky's voice crying to his hero to please come back, please be Superman again. After all the anguish he'd caused across the world through his actions, through all the derision he'd faced from the public, the fact that it was the voice of one scared child that broke through the Kryptonite's influence to the core of who Clark is as a person shows an understanding of who Superman is that goes far beyond a lot of modern writers' understandings of him. In, I remind you, a movie where this happens. So anyway, back to the scrapyard fight. The characterization of the fight is interesting to me because it's pretty clear that it isn't literal. He's not literally throwing himself around the scrapyard, at least I don't think he is, and this read actually lends itself to a little fun analysis of Superman as a person. Simply put, in this fight, Clark is everything that is human about Superman, where the dark Superman is the arrogant, spiteful Kryptonian who knows he's more powerful than anyone else on the planet. Obvious? Sure. But it works really well, especially when the movie makes it clear that the two personas are pretty evenly matched in the fight. I think it would have been tempting to have dark Superman just throw Clark around until he suddenly gets strong at the end to beat him, but the fact that it's not like that, A, adds some stakes to the fight, and B, works well to tell who Superman is. The empathetic part of him that was brought up by Jonathan and Martha Kent is just as strong as the arrogance he carries inside. In a way, the Kryptonite simply brought a battle that Clark has with himself all the time out into the open air. There are elements of this shown from time to time, such as when dark Superman tells Clark that he's had this a long time coming. This implies that the more arrogant part of Superman that exists on some level resents the goofy nature that Clark plays up to keep his identity secret. But of course, as it does every day, the Clark that believes in good wins over his own personal demons and he rises again as Superman. And the moment where this happens could have come off as cheesy. But again, Lester proves himself to actually be a good director by squeezing every ounce of triumph possible from this scene, having Clark rip his shirt open to reveal the bright blue Superman costume with the John Williams theme blaring in the background. Unlike most of everything else in this movie, this feels completely earned. For all the praise I've just heaped on this movie, I feel I do have to return to the point of this video, which is that this movie is a mess. Yes, all of that dark Superman stuff is pretty brilliant, but it still exists in a movie where a lot of stupid shit happens, so the whole ends up being less than the sum of its parts precisely because of this inconsistency. But this is still way, way better than what we could have gotten, because if the Salkinds had gotten their way initially, there wouldn't have even been all this good stuff to talk about. It would have just been bad through and through.